All right, let's go over the PowerPoint real quick. I just want to tie in some of the major topics to help make sense of them so that you can see how they're interconnected. So here's some of the major content. And these are all interrelated. I could put pretty much any one of these in the center, but since this PowerPoint is about the health history questionnaire, I've placed it in the center of the diagram. So you can see that we need to start off with the health history questionnaire because it allows us to look for red flags. Because if we start working out before we've gone through and make sure we don't have any existing problems, we can actually, we run the risk of creating a life-threatening problem or making a condition worse. So we want to look for those, and we'll talk about what those are in just a second. But that allows us to do a type of research. So if we go over here real quick to research, you need to understand the difference between qualitative and quantitative. And really the health history questionnaire is both. It's traditionally qualitative because it's asking people questions, and it can be subjective, but it also can be objective, and so it can be quantified. So it's really both is what I'm getting at. And it can be used to help set up programs to make sure that you don't make somebody's condition worse or to reach goals. Whatever it may be, it can be used in the fitness planning. So we've got fitness planning over here. It can also be used for nutrition plans. So say somebody they're overweight and they have a family history of diabetes. We can use the fitness plan in conjunction with the nutrition plan, or one or the other, to help change things, to improve that person's fitness or improve their nutrition to help reach goals. So that's a good enough explanation for right now. But we also need to understand what the health-related components of fitness are. And we're going to talk about that in the next chapter or the next module. But there are 5 of them. There's muscle strength, muscle endurance, cardiorespiratory endurance, body composition, and flexibility. And you don't always have to measure all of them, but those are the big 5. So if you go into exercise physiology or exercise test and prescription or personal training, you really need to know those 5, and you need to know them well because it's typically what we test. So we get to pretesting. This can be non-physical or physical measurements. So it could be something like blood pressure. That's normally what we want to start off with to make sure somebody doesn't have really high blood pressure and doesn't stroke out on us. So we don't want to prescribe intense heart rates or activities that would increase somebody's heart rate really high if they have really high blood pressure. So there are certain activities we don't want them to do. But there are other activities we want them to do to actually improve their blood pressure through fitness. So that would be a non-physical measurement. Girth measurements would be non-physical. Weight would be non-physical. They're not having to do any physical activity is what I'm getting at. And once we have a baseline of their fitness and their non-physical measurements, then we can develop a plan. So that's where the fitness plan comes from. Or even a nutrition plan. It could be something where we're trying to improve their nutrition. And then at the end of the semester, that's where the post-test comes in. We go back and we test those same measurements that we started with and see if they changed. See if we reached our goals, and that's where goal setting comes in. You set your goals based off the pretest and the health history questionnaire. And the pretest is all built off of the health-related components. So if you get into the physical aspect of it, it's all health-related components. Well, even body composition is considered non-physical, and it's a health-related component. So you can see how these are all tied together. Like the pretest is essentially built from the health-related components, and that gets into goal setting at the pretest level. But the post-test level also gets into goal setting because maybe you didn't reach your goals. Then we create an improvement plan based on that. Or maybe you did, but you still want to excel. You don't want to plateau. So again, that gets into improvement plans. You're like, hey, I have an existing plan that works, but now I'm going to set some new goals so I can continue to progress and overload my body and improve. And that, again, all that relates to personal training. So you can see how these are all interrelated. They're all interconnected. They're not all the major topics, because you got to think health-related components. There are 5 topics in this one area here. Pretesting is a form of research. It can be quantitative for the most part, but it can also be qualitative. You could ask somebody how they feel about exercise, and that's really getting at goal setting. So they're all related. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit more about the red flags that you may see. So if somebody has a cardiovascular issue, chronic breathing problems, joint ailments, previous disease, family history of a disease, maybe they're taking medications. There's a lot here that I haven't listed that are on a health history questionnaire that you need to take into consideration. So what do you do with red flags? Well, if it's something major like a joint issue or a heart issue or breathing issue, and the key question to ask is, have you been cleared by a doctor? If it's a red flag and they haven't been cleared by a doctor, they need to go see a physician, a medical doctor, before they begin the program. Otherwise, you open yourself up to legal problems, and the person that you're prescribing the exercise to opens them up to health risks, and they could actually harm themselves. So pre-testing and non-physical measurements. So I talked about this a little bit before. Blood pressure is non-physical. Resting heart rate is non-physical. Weight, girth measurements, body composition. All non-physical. They don't have to do any exercise to do these. And we'll talk about these more once we get to the pre-testing. I don't want to spend too much time on these videos. I want to keep them kind of short. And then the physical measurements would be like a 1 rep max for strength training. How much weight can you lift one time? Push-ups to fatigue, sit-ups in a minute. The ones I want you to do on the pre-test, the physical pre-test I have online, are the ones in bold. Make sure you do all the ones in bold. How to use the health history questionnaire? Well, you'll use it in conjunction with the pre-test. You'll use it with the FIT principle, so frequency, intensity, time, and type. So frequency is how often they work out. Intensity is how hard they're going to go. That's extremely important when we talk about health history questionnaire, because if you make the intensity too high and it's somebody with really high blood pressure, you could cause them to have a stroke, a hemorrhagic stroke. So time, how long are they going to go for, and type. What's the mode? Is it going to be aerobic? Is it going to be anaerobic? And you also need to understand qualitative and quantitative assessment. What is the difference? And like I said, this is not a research class, but I want you to have a good handle on this before you move forward, because it's important to understand what do you need. Most people just think of quantitative measurements as being important for a fitness program, but the qualitative, the subjective, like how does somebody feel about exercise, plays a big role in motivation. So you need to understand that before you start prescribing exercise. So storage of pre-tests, like once you have that information, if you're doing this for a client, you need to make sure it's secure. Don't leave it in a place where other people can get it, and don't have it connected to identifiable information like social security number and name and all that stuff. You don't want tied to their information, because it is considered health information, and we don't want that to get out. We don't want it to be used against somebody. Goal setting is extremely important. So we're going to learn how to set SMART goals in here. Make sure they're specific. So you don't want too many. You want to make sure they're measurable. That's why we're doing pre-testing and we're doing the health history questionnaire, so that we can measure some of these areas. We want to make sure they're attainable. So if you want to lose 20% body fat in 10 weeks, that's not attainable, and it's not realistic. So we need to make sure that these goals can be reached, and we need to make sure they're realistic and healthy. So time bound. We always want to go back and assess. So we want to give a period of time, whether we reach the goals in that time or not. It allows us to set small-term goals that lead to long-term goals. So that's the reason towards the end of the semester, after a certain period of time, we go back and do post-testing, if nothing else, just to see if we're on track, see if we need to make any mid-adjustments to get us on the right track. So qualitative versus quantitative, here it is in simple terms. Qualitative is subjective. If you're asking somebody their opinion on something, that's qualitative. Like, how do you feel about it? If it's quantitative, if it's something that you can put in zeros and ones, that's why I say the health history questionnaire could be zeros and ones. That's why it's both. Because I could say, okay, they have, of the red flags, they have 5 of the 6. Well, that's quantifiable, right? I mean, if we can quantify this, it is considered quantitative. But most of the time we're thinking of like, okay, I did 20 push-ups on the first test, now I did 30. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about quantitative measures. So types of exercise. So we need to understand empirical research. How are we going to change and how are we going to measure that change? So correlation, just think of that as prediction. So correlation is used a lot with exercise. That's why I think it's important for you to know. So if you've ever done a Pearson R in math, that's a correlation. That's a linear regression. And you can use it in exercise because I can say, based on how much you weigh, I can use that as prediction. So there's a positive correlation between how much you weigh and how much you can bench press. And then there's an inverse correlation between how much you weigh and how many pull-ups you can do. And that should make sense. Like bigger people tend to be able to lift heavier weight. And then the more you weigh, the harder it's going to be to pull your own body weight. So that should make sense. Experimental, like are we going to try to change something? Is there an independent and dependent variable? That's important. Laboratory experiments are important for you to understand, but field experiments are what we're doing in this class. So when you do push-ups for a minute or push-ups to fatigue, and you're taking all the like blood pressure and all these non-physical measurements, these are considered field tests. You're not doing them in a laboratory setting. The only reason I put lab on there is so you would have a comparison like between some common types of experimental designs and empirical research. So this is what I was talking about on correlations. So here we see a negative or inverse correlation as one's going up, the other one's going down. This one over here, there's no definable line, so there's no real correlation between the two, but these start to get closer. Like this one there is, we're starting to get in the higher numbers. So if this was a perfect 1, that's a 1 right there on a Pearson R. This one might be like 0.80, 0.85, maybe not even that good. This one's probably close to 60 or 50. I don't know, it may be even worse than that. Or when I say 50, like 0.20, 0.50, somewhere right around in there. It's not very good. I can't eyeball that one, but this one I can. This one definitely I can tell you is 1.0 on a Pearson R. All right, so variables. We need to know the difference between independent variables and dependent variables. You're not going to use this a lot in class, but it will be something that if you go into exercise physiology and you do a lot of experiments, you really need to understand this. Or if you're going to do exercise test and prescription where you're trying to change things. So I put this because it's a classic example of sunlight being the independent variable. It's going to influence how much the plant grows based on how much sunlight it's exposed to. So it is independent, but this one is dependent on the sunlight. The plant growth is dependent upon that sunlight. So we can think of this in terms of exercise. So I can say this is the amount of exercise and this is the amount of muscle hypertrophy, right? If we're talking about strength training, or this is the amount of aerobic training and this is the amount of increase in red blood cells within the body. You get the idea. So the dependent variable is dependent upon the independent. All right, reinforcement versus punishment. This is one that a lot of people get confused. It's more for goal setting than anything else. And it is, you need to understand this if you're going to be a personal trainer, because the thing I want you to take away from this is that reinforcement, sometimes you have to use punishment, but punishment's not really good for exercise because you can have somebody get conditioned that you don't want to ever use exercise as punishment, because then you condition them that exercise is bad and then they're going to lose motivation to do it. So reinforcement's the way to go. And so, but you need to know what is the difference. If you're trying to increase their behavior by either giving them something positive or take something they don't like away, then that would be a form of reinforcement. So I just gave you an example of positive reinforcement by giving something that they want, something they desire to increase behavior, or you take something away they don't want, that would be negative reinforcement because you're still trying to increase the behavior. Now punishment, you also have positive and negative punishment. So positive punishment would be I'm adding something they don't want. So something's being added that they don't want to decrease behavior. Or for negative punishment, I'm taking something away that they want, like take away their, if it's a kid, their video games to decrease behavior. All right, so I don't want that behavior to happen. And if you don't reinforce, then you'll have extinction. So you got to continually use positive reinforcement. Don't get bogged down in that. I just wanted to explain it to you. Health history questionnaire. So you're going to have some questions come up. One of the main questions you're going to see in this course is, what is the purpose of the health history questionnaire? And really for us is we're looking for red flags. We want to make sure there's no health issues before somebody starts off and starts working out or starts trying to change things. So we really need to look for those red flags. You may hear a health history questionnaire be called a PAR-Q, or a physical activity readiness questionnaire. We're really talking about the same thing. They may have a few more questions or a few less, but ideally they're pretty much the same thing. And but it helps you make sure that they're ready to exercise. That's the key. And so you're going to complete the health history questionnaire and submit it to me. And then you're going to make a video about that, and that's in the modules. So I know this was not very short, but the next ones will be much shorter. I'll move through them a lot faster. I'll try to keep them right around 10 minutes.